As someone who does a lot of camera reviews, one great benefit is that I got sent a lot of camera gears regularly, so a lot of time I got to play with some brand new gear even before they hit the market and I don't have to pay any money for it. But sometimes it does end up costing me money because after I play with the gear, I really like it so much that I don't want to return the sample. And in today's video, it is one of the product I end up asking the manufacturer, please tell me how much it is, I will pay you the money instead of sending you the sample back. Kia ora, good morning everyone, Richard Wong here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at another new lens from Zhongyi. And if you're not familiar with the name Zhongyi, they made a lot of lenses under the name Mitakon. I have reviewed quite a few of them on this channel previously and also on my blog if you have been following me for a long time. And today's lens is the latest lens for micro four thirds camera. It is the Zhongyi 17mm f/0.95 lens. First of all, I want to mention this is a early pre-production sample, and a lot of time with the early pre-production sample, there are issues, flaws, or things that they haven't quite get around to address it. And this is the same for this Zhongyi 17mm f/0.95 lens. So I'm going to mention some of the issues that I found, but these issues should all be resolved by the time they do the final production run. In traditional Zhongyi style, the lens comes in a leather box, and the box looks very nice, looks very premium. I don't really know whether the leather on here is real or not, but probably doesn't matter because it feels amazing. And inside the box, we have the lens here. So the lens comes with a lens hood, and also as usual the front and rear lens cap, and also some user instruction manual as well. The first thing I want to mention is that the lens hood for this pre-production sample, when I try to mount it onto the lens, it doesn't actually lock onto the lens. But as I mentioned, this is an early pre-production sample and I have talked to the manufacturer about it. The build quality of this lens is very good. As usual, you would expect, it's mostly made of metal, from the very nice polished tip at the front to the whole body is made of metal. The aperture ring is at the top here, and it is aperture ring with clicks, so I really like it. I was worried that this is another of those lenses that use the declicked aperture ring, but fortunately this is not the case. The aperture ring has clicks. However, because this is an early production sample, when I'm turning the aperture ring at some certain direction, the click doesn't feel quite the same. The kind of feedback isn't quite the same, but it should be much better with the final production. And then we have the manual focus ring here at the bottom, and it's very smooth, buttery smooth when you are turning it. And the total travel is around 135 degrees or so, which I think is pretty okay for a 17mm lens, even though it is really large aperture. But yeah, it feels very nice and it's pretty easy to use. And another good thing is on the infinity side, when you turn all the way here, there's a hard stop, and when you hit the hard stop, the focus is exactly at infinity, so it's not like slightly beyond at beyond infinity. So it makes it very easy when you want to quickly turn the focus ring and take some object that is at infinity distance. And this lens has an internal focus design, so the length doesn't extend when you are changing the focus, and the front filter thread is 58mm for those of you who want to put a filter in front of the lens. While this is definitely not the smallest or lightest micro four thirds lens, for example, if you compare it with my Leica 25 1.4, you can see that this 17 f/0.95 is a bit bigger, and also it feels more solid and also a bit heavier compared to the more practically feel like a 25 1.4, but it's still not like a huge or very heavy lens. And when I mount it onto a camera like the GH5, it actually feels really balanced, and also just feel very nice when you mount it onto a camera like the GH5. It just looks fantastic. I don't know what's the reason, but maybe just because the size and also the design of the lens, it just looks very balanced when you mount it on GH5 or G9. If you mount it on a smaller camera, for example, Olympus Pen or a GX85, then it would be quite a bit front heavy and probably slightly unbalanced, because with those smaller body and a smaller grip, it would not feel as nice and comfortable as if it's mounted on a GH5. But yeah, I just really like how the camera looks and feel when I have it mounted on the GH5. I would even say this is probably the best looking and also the best like feeling balanced micro four thirds camera lens combo that I have tried over the last 10 years. Okay, now let's have a look at the image quality and start with the image sharpness. At f/0.95, the center sharpness is, I say, okay. There is definitely a little bit of softness that you can see when you zoom in and check the photo more closely, and also you may see a bit of color fringing because of the local, which would get greatly reduced once you start to stop down. At f1.4, the center sharpness improved quite a lot, and also the local become a lot less visible. And once you stop down to f2, then the center sharpness become excellent, and also I don't really see much color fringing near the center anymore. Corner at f/0.95 is definitely soft. Stop down to f1.4 would improve the sharpness a bit, but it's still a bit soft, and once you stop down to f2 or f2.8, then the corner sharpness become a lot better. But when you stop down to f2.8, you can now see the color fringing at the corner because of the transverse chromatic aberration. Unfortunately, the transverse chromatic aberration is something that you cannot really reduce even if you stop down the lens further, but if you don't really like it, then you can try to remove it during post-processing. Vignetting is quite noticeable at f/0.95, but for such an ultra fast lens, I think vignetting at the maximum aperture is actually pretty decent. Stop down to f1.4 would improve vignetting quite a lot, and by the time you stop down to around f2.8, then vignetting is not really noticeable anymore. For a prime lens with 35mm equivalent focal length, I really wasn't expecting there would be a lot of distortion. You may not really notice, but I have been using this lens to shoot some of my YouTube video for quite a while, and including the Zepon E800 slider video that I also use this lens as the main camera in the middle to shoot that review. And when I was editing that review, I immediately noticed there is quite a bit of distortion near the bottom edge of the frame. So I'm not sure how many would have noticed that distortion, but yeah, definitely there is quite a bit of distortion. And when I was shooting my brick wall distortion test photo, I can easily see the distortion that is from this lens. When you are shooting directly into a very bright light source, for example, when you're shooting directly into the sun, quite often you can get quite a bit of lens flare. You may see some circle-shaped rainbow color-ish ghosting. That is something that you really have to be careful if you want to shoot at the maximum aperture, especially if you don't use the lens hood. Then it's quite easy to have those kind of lens flare. But I do find that if you use the lens hood, and also if you stop down a little bit, once you stop down to f1.4, then lens flare would dramatically reduce, even if you're directly shooting into a very strong light source. So yeah, if you want to minimize, just be careful with the aperture you choose, and also try to use the lens hood to help minimize the lens flare. When you buy such an ultra fast lens, I think one of the things that you are most interested in is the bokeh, or how the lens render the background out of focus area. And I would say I really love the bokeh from this Zhongyi 17mm f/0.95 lens. When you are shooting at the maximum aperture, the bokeh is beautiful. It's rounded, it's very smooth. When you look at the transition, how it transitions from the bokeh to the background, there is a little bit of cat's eye near the edge of the frame, but overall it just looks very nice, very dreamy, and also it has a little bit of character. To me, I think that looks beautiful. But you do have to shoot at the maximum aperture f/0.95 if you want to have that very dreamy and very magical looking bokeh, because once you stop down the lens, even at f/1.4, the bokeh looks quite a bit different. It still looks pretty nice. It doesn't look nervous, it's still quite rounded and quite smooth, but it just doesn't look quite the same as if you were shooting at the maximum aperture. And when you stopping down the lens, then the shape of the bokeh, the outline of the bokeh would now start turning into a polygon shape. But even when you stop down to f4, the outline of the bokeh is still relatively round and smooth compared to some other lenses at the same aperture. If you like having sunstars in your photos, with this Zhongyi 17mm lens, you stop down to around f4 or f5.6, then you can start to have sunstars. And if you stop down all the way to f16, I think the sunstars looks pretty beautiful. Because this lens has such a fast aperture, I think some of you would ask me whether this lens is good for astrophotography or not. I think my answer would be yeah, maybe. The reason I say that is because if you are shooting at the maximum aperture f/0.95, there is definitely a bit of COMA near the edge or corner of the photo. Stop down to f/1.4 will greatly reduce the amount of COMA near the edge of the photo, and if you stop down to f2, then I think the amount of COMA is now very minimal. So yeah, if you want to use it for astrophotography, I would say maybe around f/1.4 to f2 is the aperture that you would use to shoot. So now you may wonder, I have mentioned a few things that the lens is not quite perfect. For example, the distortion is a bit more than what I would like to see, and also there's quite a bit of lens flare. But why do I still want to buy and keep this lens? Because I have definitely reviewed some other lenses that is more technically perfect than this lens, and I didn't buy most of those lenses. And I guess my answer is quite simple. Yes, it is not a technically perfect lens. There are a few flaws that I have mentioned in this review. But overall, I think the image quality is good enough, and I would say probably more than good enough, because I am very happy to shoot this lens at f/0.95. I have been using this lens over the last couple of weeks, and a lot of photos, I think 90% of the photos I shot with this lens were shot at f/0.95, and the quality of the photo is excellent. The sharpness is nice. I just really love how it rendered the whole picture when I'm shooting at f/0.95, how it transits from the in-focus area to out-of-focus area. It just looks very nice. It has a bit of character that is make it quite special if you compare to the look of some other lenses. With micro four thirds cameras, because of its slightly smaller sensor if you compare to the APS-C or full frame cameras, it make it a lot harder to dissolve the background. I'm not saying you can't do that. You can definitely do that, but usually that means you are either taking some macro or close-up photos so that you can easily dissolve the background completely, or you have to rely on some longer focal length so that you can have a more shallow depth of field. For example, you may go for the Leica 42.5 Nauticron or the Olympus 75 1.8. Those are beautiful lenses, but you do have to rely on the longer focal length if you want to dissolve the background. So it's quite hard for a micro four thirds wide angle lens to give you that foreground background separation when you are taking normal photos. The two lenses that I can think of that can do that at this kind of focal length would be the Olympus 17 1.2 Pro lens or the Voigtlander 17 f/0.95 lens, but those two lenses are both quite expensive. This Zhongyi 17mm f/0.95 lens is a lot cheaper than those two lenses. It's pretty much the only wide angle ultra fast lens that can give me that kind of shallow depth of field look on a micro four thirds camera, and also doesn't break my bank. And yeah, when I look at the photos that I've been using, a lot of them are just my family photo. When I go out, I grab the GH5 with this lens and taking photos. And when I look at the photos, I don't really see any of the flaws that I mentioned in this review. I didn't see the distortion, or I don't really see much lens flare at all. I just see how beautiful it render the photo and give me that full frame look that is really hard usually with a wide angle micro four thirds lens. So that's why I really want to keep the lens and bought the lens, because I think this would be a great lens on the GH5 for me to take my everyday photos, and also it would be a great lens for me to shoot my YouTube review videos. So in the future, you will definitely see a lot of my review videos on this channel that is shot using this Zhongyi 17mm f/0.95 lens.